with the support of the Republican majority in the Senate as the only thing standing between Donald Trump and his potential removal from office. If the House votes to impeach him, nasty infighting at the highest levels of Donald Trump's West Wing on the eve of the first public hearing in the impeachment proceeding against the president probably isn't a good omen. Washington Post front page story on the Civil War spilling into the open reads, quote, the White House's bifurcated and disjointed response to Democrats' impeachment inquiry has been fueled by a fierce West Wing battle between two of President Trump's top advisors. And the outcome of the messy skirmish could be on full display this week. That's according to White House and congressional officials. The New York Times adds the broader context with this, quote, in the 3 years since his election, Mr. Trump has never been accused of running a cohesive, unified team. But the revelations of recent days have put on display, perhaps more starkly than ever, the fissures tearing at his administration. In the emerging picture, the Trump White House is a toxic stew of personality disputes, policy differences, political rivalries, ethical debates, and a fundamental rift over the president himself. Today's now public brawl is between the two most powerful people in the West Wing other than the president, Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and White House counsel Pat Cipollone. And it's over who's to blame for the two most incriminating actions the White House has taken since the scandal first consumed the White House. From the Washington Post, quote, Mulvaney's office blames White House counsel Pat Cipollone for not doing more to stop other government officials from participating in the impeachment inquiry. And in the other corner, Cipollone, meanwhile, has fumed that Mulvaney only made matters worse with his October 17th news conference when he publicly acknowledged a quid pro quo, essentially confirming Democrats' accusations in front of television cameras and reporters. Cipollone did not want Mulvaney to hold the news conference. The disagreements over the basic way to respond to the charge of abuse of power between two of the president's closest aides is manifesting itself today in a chaotic GOP response. A Republican memo designed to shape the message for the president's defenders claims, quote, the body of evidence shows instead that President Trump holds a deep-seated, genuine, and reasonable skepticism of Ukraine due to its history of pervasive corruption. No sooner had Jim Jordan written that on his arm than the president blew it up, undercutting his own defense by confessing again on Twitter today that the pressure campaign against Ukraine was just about getting dirt on the Bidens. He tweeted this, quote, I have an obligation to look into corruption and Biden's actions, adding, both Bidens should be forced to testify in this no due process scam. I'm going to get him a grammar teacher if this goes on much longer. The Trump GOP mayhem, 18 hours before impeachment hearings commence, is where we start today. Senior writer for Politico Jake Sherman joins us at the table. White House bureau chief for the Washington Post, Phil Rucker's here. Former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance. Senior FBI official Chuck Rosenberg, also a former U.S. Attorney and Associate Editor for Real Clear Politics, A.B. Stoddard's here. Some of our favorite reporters and friends on the eve of this historic day. Some unbelievable reporting in your newspaper, Phil Rucker. Take us through it.
Yeah, Nicole, I don't think anyone would be surprised to learn that the impeachment response being managed by President Trump's advisors is chaotic and disruptive, but indeed it is chaotic. And they can't even get on the same page. And this has been going on for 2 months now since the impeachment inquiry first began. There was a failure to provide sort of credible defenses and explanations to the president's allies on Capitol Hill who have been eager to defend him and are not armed with the information and the material that they need to do so. And now you're seeing the split between the White House chief of staff and the White House counsel. Those are the two single most important figures in the impeachment defense of the president and of the administration who can't get on the same page, have been rivals now for several months in building. And those tensions are exacerbating just at the moment when the president needs them to be coming together and uniting to defend his very presidency, which is at stake starting tomorrow.
And look, I know from being in a White House that had a lot of political challenges, that holding Republican support on Capitol Hill is about sort of projecting stability, more stability than exists in a White House, more stability, strength, and order than exists in any White House. Yeah. But to have the two most senior people, other than Donald Trump, at war over the two most damaging things that have happened to Donald Trump since this scandal began is more than just a fight over who gets the talking points every morning.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it goes to the heart of the claim here and what exactly it is that they're trying to defend the president against doing. Remember, initially it was no, there was no quid pro quo. Then Mulvaney told the world there was. Then he said there wasn't. Now the president says there was. And they can't seem to figure out how to defend the president. Now we're seeing in this Republican memo that has come out today that the argument is about the president's state of mind. Can you prove that he had culpability? Can you prove that in his mind he wanted to commit wrongdoing? But that goes beyond whether wrongdoing happened.
I mean, they're not.
This is a political process.
This is a political process. All they have to do is assert. I mean, this is where they're missing their opportunity to be Trumpy. I mean, this is not a criminal proceeding. You do not have to, beyond a reasonable doubt, prove criminal intent. I mean, they are not hemmed in by the sorts of things that restrain them in their defense in the Mueller probe, and they're doing worse. And I mean, this wasn't the plan, but let's just go through who's in each corner here. Mick Mulvaney is the White House chief of staff, so I think technically on an org chart, probably the most powerful person, but they never made him such. He's in acting, and I think he has a couple other jobs. But he is the person who went out and confessed to one of the claims at the heart of the abuse of power charge, if that's one of the counts of obstruction, right?
He did. He confessed, and then he didn't. Then he unconfessed.
Sort of.
Sort of. But what the Republican strategy seems to be now makes some sense to me. Pick something and stick with it. You're absolutely right, Nicole. It's not a criminal trial. They don't have to prove intent. They don't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. But to Phil's point, first it was no quid pro quo, and then the process lacked transparency. Now they seem to be going after state of mind. Fine. Pick something and stick with it. When you see shifting defenses, it's really an indicator that there is no defense.
Well, and then so that's why Cipollone is mad at Mulvaney. He went out, and he seems to have a point there. But Cipollone, we learned in some reporting last week in the New York Times, told his deputy, go talk to the president about that transcript if you're worried that there's some wrongdoing there. I mean, neither one is conducting themselves with any sort of clear moral authority.
The problem is they really don't have a leg to stand on here, and this entire house of cards falls apart if people start talking about, for instance, the president's tweet today and this notion that, well, he didn't have the state of mind that would have been a guilty or a corrupt state of mind to engage in bribery because he was focused on investigating corruption and investigating the Bidens. And if, in fact, that's true and there was a case there to be investigated, then great, call the FBI. You have the premier law enforcement agency in the world just down the street on Pennsylvania Avenue. Why are you bribing the Ukrainians?
It's such a good point. If there was anything above board here, AB, Donald Trump as the president has at his disposal the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the State Department. I mean, there were ways to investigate corruption. A former DOJ official told me 5 weeks ago, go find me a single example of Donald Trump caring about obstruction in any time zone, anywhere on the planet Earth.
This is the problem, is that it didn't take the tweet today for him to say, no, it is just generally about my potential most difficult electable nominee rival in the 2020 election. Donald Trump told us on television that he wanted China to investigate the Bidens. He spoke specifically many times about this. And when asked if he's interested in any other corruption example in this country of Ukraine or anywhere else, he hasn't been able to come up with an example. He actually didn't even want an investigation of Biden. He wanted the president of Ukraine to go on CNN and say there was an investigation into Joe Biden to smear him and ruin him politically. And I think we're getting really involved in the day-to-day, the kind of the things that Jim Jordan wants to throw around, and these, the memo that Axios got on all the crazy things they're going to say, which are all rebuttable, easily. Mm-hmm. But this is a broad conspiracy, people conspiring to either be involved in this plot with Rudy and the president or to cover their rear ends at the highest levels of government. Mick Mulvaney is deeply exposed. Mike Pompeo is deeply exposed. Vice President Mike Pence is exposed. Rick Perry, who left his position as cabinet secretary at the Energy Department, is exposed. This is the problem for Republicans. It's not just that the president tweets out a different defense every time they try to stay on one. It's that this is a very, very broad operation, and people are culpable all over the top of the executive branch. Mike Pompeo gave the State Department over to Rudy Giuliani. We're not talking about how broad and deep this runs. Other people will be in trouble. So talking about a July 25th phone call, Rudy Giuliani has been working on this since 2018 or early 19, not since July 10th.
And talking about it on Fox News.
And the president, telling us. And the president of Ukraine, when he was elected, was terrified immediately about what this meant to the relationship between Ukraine and the United States. So what the House Republicans want us to do right now this week is stay in the weeds about these little things, about this witness or this testimony or whatever. But you have to step back, and the Democrats are really failing to message this and talk about it this way and see how deep this runs in the government. When when Rick Perry was sent to the inaugural delegation for President Zelensky instead of Mike Pence, that was a huge snub. Mike Pence knew that he was supposed to take that trip, but all of a sudden he wasn't taking that trip. So he's known very, very far well into this calendar of events. And they're all, like I said, culpable because they were either engaged like Mulvaney or they knew about it.
You know what? It's a good admonition, and let's put the weeds aside. We will get to them because those Republican talking points deserve to be rebutted. But let me bring you in on this, Jake Sherman. There is history being made tomorrow. For the third time in our country's history, the House is commencing an impeachment proceeding against a president who plainly and obviously, repeatedly, over several months, as AB is suggesting, perhaps over the course of more than a year, abused his office for no purpose other than the political mission of some bizarre fixation on the 2016 election result, an allegation about Ukraine that Tom Bossert, his own Homeland Security director, tried to beat out of his poisoned mind. His mind has been described as poisoned by multiple news organizations with this conspiracy theory, a smear against Marie Yovanovitch, a lifelong career diplomat, and the extortion over military aid for an American ally trying to defend itself against Russia. What is the sort of, with the cameras off mindset about what's going to start tomorrow?
Well, first of all, I think we should just set aside that memo, which we ran in Playbook also this morning, because it's basically an 18-page press release. No member of Congress, I could pretty much guarantee you, not one member of that committee has read that in total or in part. So it's just a way to get their message out to a broader audience. That's number one. Number two, I cannot tell you what we say at Politico, what we said since the beginning, Nicole. You remember when we started, what would politicians say if we put them on truth serum? So what members of the committee and House Republicans tell me over and over again is that they don't want to talk about the substance because they don't understand the totality of the substance, so they talk about other issues. It's important to keep in mind because that's what they're doing here. First, it was process. Then it's questioning the motives of witnesses. Then it's questioning whether they have firsthand information, firsthand knowledge of various decisions. You're going to hear people talk about whether the president talked to Bill Taylor. Well, we know that he hasn't talked to some of these diplomats and they still carried out his orders. Another thing is Republicans thought they had an off-ramp here. They thought they were able to say, what the president did was wrong. It made me uncomfortable, but it was not impeachable. You saw that from kind of the top level of the party. Then the president blew that up. So you have Republicans, House Republicans, going into this hearing tomorrow completely in a lot of Republicans' views, including some very close to the leadership, completely unprepared for what's going on here because again, they are not willing or able to defend the White House as a substantive matter. Many of them, not all of them, many of them. So they have to rely on these side issues. And we know what the end game is pretty much, right? We know the president is going to be impeached by the House. We don't know that with 100% certainty. We know with 95% certainty. So what happens tomorrow is a very, very important stagecraft. But I would argue, and maybe I'll argue this tomorrow morning in Playbook, what I would argue is the polls aren't going to move much. I mean, the polls right now mirror where America is. So as we go into tomorrow will become fodder for campaign ads, an important evidence as the Senate considers this in a couple weeks and months. And we saw Chairman Richard Burr, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, saying a trial could last in the Senate for 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, that's a very long time. So a very historic moment. And again, Republicans really do not feel that they're going in adequately prepared for what a very, very prepared and very intent and very focused Democratic majority.
Let me just challenge a couple of the pillars of prediction, because I'm scarred from 2016. I'm out of the prediction business, but I would posit.
And I tried to not be in it too, but I just slipped into it.
But the polls, we do not have very many events in this country. I can think of the Olympics. I can think of the Christine Blasey Ford testimony and the cabinet testimony. We do not have very many events in this country that are broadcast on 6 networks, 3 cables and 3 network televisions. And as a result, we don't always know what something being viewed by, I mean, the Super Bowl, you know, we do not have many news events that are broadcast wall to wall in what's called roadblock coverage. I mean, is there a contingency plan in case when people see these, you know, there are, I believe, 2 Purple Heart recipients, a Vietnam War veteran, an Iraq War veteran, career diplomats, people recruited by Mike Pompeo. People will not see politicians on the stand. They will see people who have traveled to countries that nobody working in Donald Trump's politically appointed West Wing would deign to take a $130,000 salary to go work, to protect and advance American national security. I mean, is there any sense on Capitol Hill that the earth could change underneath them?
There is that sense, but allowing for that kind of preparation would require having people atop the party who could think outside of the realm of Donald Trump. And this is not a criticism, but we've seen, based on many years of evidence, that the top of the Republican Party, especially on the House side, Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise and Liz Cheney, are basically as tied to Trump as anybody. Again, not a critique, a reflection of the reality. They have not criticized the president much here. And I'm not really sure what the fallback plans could and would be. I mean, you might get a break off of some people, but at this point, based on the information that we know, and I agree with you that we've never seen anything like this, and Democrats are choosing these witnesses because they're not political. But we don't, I mean, the top of the House Republican Conference does not anticipate much breakage even after these couple weeks. It might be famous last words, but again, that's the reality that they see right now going into tomorrow. And remember who's going to be doing the questioning here. It's going to be basically Adam Schiff and his counsel versus Devin Nunes and his counsel. And that's important to keep in mind. Very different styles, very different politicians who are going to be controlling this massively important hearing in front of potentially millions of people. So
the reason I want to put these questions on the table is sort of having existed at the intersection of politics, working for politicians and government officials, and now being very new to the television side of this. Here's what political television usually looks like. For 4 nights, and we try for 3 nights in the summer, every 4 years, each side watches their own convention. That's kind of it. Each side watches their own primary debates, and then every 4 years in a general, millions of people watch general election debates. That's what political television looks like in this country. And even those events are not necessarily broadcast on 6 networks. And none of them feature the kinds of people who are witnesses in Donald Trump's impeachment. These are not people who campaign. These are not people who probably regularly vote. They probably don't vote in midterm elections. They don't wear buttons. They don't wear pins. They don't play. The country has never seen a trial where all of the witnesses so far are either Donald Trump's own political employee, Gordon Sondland, who testifies to a quid pro quo for the military aid conditioned on investigations into the Bidens and an investigation in 2016, is a lifelong Republican. He campaigned for every Republican I worked for. Anytime he went to Oregon, Gordon Sondland was involved. The NSC officials, all those transcripts have come out. Those weren't people that worked for Obama. Those are Republican hand-picked foreign policy experts. The country isn't going to see the kinds of people on their TV screens that they usually see.
That's right. And even though these people are experts in their field, they're not testifying as experts. They're not giving opinions. They're like the guy standing in the bank lobby when it gets robbed. They saw something, they heard something, or maybe they heard something from someone who heard something. They're just there to tell the folks what happened, right? Nothing more. No spin, right? No political analysis, no opinion, no conjecture. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, what really fascinates me is not so much the direct questioning of them, the questioning that will be done by the Democrats, but the cross-examination. Will they pick a theory? Will they go after them personally? Will they try and undercut their credibility? I think that would be a huge mistake, by the way, and I'm sure Joyce knows this. But when we tried cases as federal prosecutors, the best defense attorneys picked a theme and stuck with it. You heard about it in opening, you heard about it in closing, you heard it on cross, and you heard it on direct. You heard the same theme throughout. And if they're not prepared, as Jake suggests, to do that, it's going to be a mess.
So, Joyce, I spent a lot of time working for Republican politicians. I've spent no time working for Democrats. So I do not have any sort of objectivity. But it would seem to me that one side has prepared itself with fact witnesses who have no affiliation to a party. The other one, as Jake said, has literally sewn itself with a needle to Donald Trump, who undermined this morning's talking points, this morning's GOP memo. Said, what I read, that on substance they haven't proven anything other than Donald Trump cared about corruption. Donald Trump 10 minutes later tweets, I wanted the Bidens. I mean, this is, I don't even know how to articulate how potentially screwed Republicans are.
You know, you would think, right? But so far they've survived pretty well for whatever reason.
Really?
So I think so. And I think Chuck's point is an interesting one, this notion of sticking to a theme. They had sort of 4 talking points in their memo that were based on the transcript. And then, as you said, Donald Trump blew that up. So an interesting thing to watch tomorrow is how they'll actually treat these witnesses, right? These, as Chuck points out, they're career diplomats. You know, juries in a criminal setting don't like it when, whether it's prosecutors or defense lawyers, when they treat witnesses badly, if the jury likes them. And so in this talking points memo that the Republicans released, to the extent that any of them read it, as Jake pointed out.
Well, everyone reads what Jake writes, so we know that we read it there.
And this was on the second page, right, where they're talking about strategy, and they say, multiple Democrat witnesses said. And to the extent that Republicans tomorrow try to portray these career diplomats who've served their country abroad in difficult postings, if they try to portray them as Democrats, who knows how the public might react? That could be a breaking point.
Do you agree?
It could be a breaking point. And there's one thing to keep in mind here, which is that President Trump, as the leader of the Republican Party, is allowing no flexibility on the part of his Republican defenders in
I know
Congress.
they have to say it was a perfect call. They can't even say
Exactly.
it was a so-so call.
He's not only expecting them to defend his presidency and keep him in office, but he's expecting them to go to the mat to defend his conduct as perfect, as nothing wrong, 100%. And that's a very difficult thing for them to do.
Someone is definitely piping North Korean state TV into the West Wing.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.